Previously, we discussed how developers and politicians and the media leverage territorial stigmatization in subtle ways to push gentrification. The second subtle effect of gentrification is bike lanes. Bike lanes obviously are not racist. However, this doesn't take away the fact that those who implement bike lanes in urban areas may have a motive to gentrify or make the neighborhood quote-unquote livable. We will cite several sources, but will mainly use Melody Lynn Hoffman's dissertation on bike lanes in Portland, Oregon, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. The universal collective unconscious tells you bike lanes are safe. That is just a symbol, but like any other sign on the road, you obey it, you acknowledge it, and you give it power. Bike lanes take away our credibility to glorify dilapidated, rundown areas. If we as residents buy into the self-fulfilling prophecy of territorial stigmatization, then bike lanes are seen as a reassurance to the creative class that subconsciously their interests in nightlife, entertainment, and the arts come before residents' concerns. Bike lanes are a continuation of passive aggressiveness, symbolism used to further white supremacy, disguise of passive aggressive tactics that lure creative class residents from far and near. Bike lanes are cheaper than investing in the residents in the community. Why invest in residents that you have oppressed for centuries when there are a fresh creative class of graduate students looking to live in gentrified areas? After all, only the creative class can afford to live there. Bike lanes are promoted as safety initiatives, as health conscious, and cuts fuel emissions, thus saving the planet. When you think of bike lanes, you think of innocent working class people, not soulless capitalists who cause massive displacement. The creative class was coined by best-selling author Richard Florida. Florida describes the creative class as compromising of 40 million U.S. workers, about 30% of the U.S. workforce. He breaks down the class in two broad sections. The super creative core includes a wide range of occupants: science, engineering, education, computer programming, research, with arts, design, and media workers forming a small subset. The other core are the creative professionals. These professionals are the classic knowledge-based workers and include those working in healthcare, business, and finance, the legal sector, and education. In addition to these two main groups of creative people, the usually much smaller group of bohemians is also included in the creative class. With his Martin Propensity Institute research team, Richard Florida looked into the effects of talent clustering, a term that refers to the creative class flocking to specific cities for specific lifestyle amenities. Florida found that talent clustering does not produce trickle-down benefits to those who fall outside of the creative class. Its benefits flow disproportionately to more highly skilled knowledge professional and creative workers. Less skilled service and blue-collar workers tend to earn more money in talent clusters, but those gains disappear once their higher housing costs are taken into account. Hoffman discusses in her dissertation about the inner conflict between long-standing residents in the Portland neighborhood and bicycle advocates. The Thomas B. Fordham Institute, a nonprofit education policy think tank, released a list of the top 50 gentrifying zip codes based on race and population, U.S. Census data. 2 zip codes in Portland made the list, at number 20 and number 35 respectively. These 2 zip codes run right next to each other and cover a good portion of North Williams Avenue. Showed that the North Williams Avenue area has seen about a 20% increase in white residents while maintaining a steady population. Sharon Maxwell Hendricks, a community member, argued early on, "You say you want it safe for everybody, how come it wasn't safe 10 years ago? We wanted safe streets back then, but now that the bicyclists want to have safe streets, now it's all about the bicyclists getting safe streets." Hoffman continues to assert that, to be clear, I am not arguing that bicycle infrastructure in itself is a form of gentrification. Rather, I argue that the bicycle infrastructure can be easily swept into larger projects working to cater to the upwardly mobile, creative white demographic. You may be wondering what attracts the creative class to these neighborhoods and vice versa. These artists enhance the profit-generating income strategies embedded in previously poor and working-class neighborhoods. As the neighborhood shifts or gentrifies, new residents are able to feel the grit of the neighborhood without having to deal with the reasons for the grit, including poverty and prior disinvestment of the neighborhood. Potential employees are choosing where to live based on lifestyle potential more than employment options today, more than ever before. Florida reports that virtually all the creative workers I talked to, and my empirical studies underline the fact that location and community are more important than ever. My interview subjects continually recounted their desire and need to live in places that offered stimulating creative environments. Some picked the place they wanted to live and then focused their job search there. The ability for these workers to move to stimulating creative environments is bound up in class privilege. Few can afford this sort of mobility, nor have the option to move around to different cities. With the demographic changes taking place in the American urban core, biking has come to symbolize white repopulation. Urban planners see Portland as one of the most livable cities, but black residents wonder, livable for whom? And Smith validates this question, answering that gentrification is marketed as making cities livable, meaning livable for the middle class. To show how bicycle lanes connect to such livability, Davis argues improvements such as bike lanes increase the perceived livability of a neighborhood, serving as a sign to developers and housing speculators that a neighborhood is open for business. In this way, bike lanes play at least an indirect role in making neighborhoods too expensive for low-income neighborhoods. Utilize data from the American Community Survey based on the 2010 census. Utilize data from the American Community Survey based on the 2010 U.S. Census to suggest that cities where people bike commute are generally more affluent, have higher levels of education, and are negatively associated with working-class jobs. He summarizes these findings, adding that cities with high levels of biking are happier and more creative too. Charles Ford, an Albina resident since 1951, argued that the government subtly assisted white people in revitalizing of Albina. We never envisioned that the government would move in and mainly assist whites. They come into the area, younger whites, the Portland Development Commission, and gave them businesses and home loans and grants and made it comfortable and easy for them to come. Ford also claimed that white people came in with an attitude of "we're in charge" instead of "we want to be a part of you." It's like the revitalization of racism. Blogger Angie Smith argues in her post on gentrification and cycling, changes to our streets are often the most visible signs of government power in most of our lives. As such, infrastructure decisions are inherently political, and those with greater resources have always held an advantage in seeing their wishes enshrined in concrete and pavement, or whatever the case may be. Just as ghettos are not accidental, neither is the redevelopment of the ghetto. Hoffman further explains, in Minneapolis, I have found evidence that the local government is co-opting bicycle infrastructure to recruit, educate, upwardly mobile people with little regard to its impact. In my interview with him, I asked Mayor Ryback of Minneapolis why he invested in bike infrastructure, and he was upfront about who he hopes is attracted to Minneapolis through the infrastructure. Attracting people like you from other communities to bike culture, he said to me. He made this point twice in our interview, and when I asked him what he meant about attracting particular people, he said, the key to economic growth is attracting talent, especially in the creative field. Talent is very mobile. Our bicycle infrastructure has attracted this wide swath of people to get something they can't find in a freeway-oriented place like Houston, even in a city with a great reputation like Austin for attracting cutting-edge talent. They are not even in the same league as Minneapolis on bike culture. That gives us a huge competitive advantage. In a report by the City Lab, it describes the fact that those with lower income bike more, while those with higher income bike share. Activists in Harlem protested against bike shares, claiming that they were beginning stages of gentrification. Bike shares are strategically placed in areas where residents cannot use them, but students, bankers, and politicians can. All too often, the technologies, the companies, and even the venture capital dollars flowed out of town to places that had bigger and better stocks of talented and creative people. A study done by the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota found that Nice Ride users spend an average of $150,000 at businesses near Nice Ride Station in over one season. Nice Ride stations include a map of the area with suggestions for places to visit, thus funneling riders to particular businesses and influencing economic growth. Lastly, many feel that bike share programs discriminate against the lower class by only offering debit credit card options to rideshare the bicycles. In conclusion, we understand the neglect by city officials towards the middle lower class, and we understand the economic prosperity that the creative class can bring to communities in the eyes of city officials as well. Prioritizing bicycle infrastructure over chronic issues such as poverty, after-school programs or lack thereof, and crime exposes the real interests of city officials. If city officials saw the potential in inner-city residents, more efforts will be spent into rebuilding broken communities rather than attract the creative class to pay for rising housing costs. Bicycle lanes are as symbolic as American flags in Republicans' front yards, Confederate flags in the Deep South, or a swastika on a Jewish synagogue. Each symbolism incites a certain reaction based upon the observer, but it still is, after all, a harmless symbol. Harmless enough to represent hate groups. A hooded robe is just a hooded robe until there is a Klan rally. White supremacists understand the power of subtle symbolism and how the human brain associates with this symbolism. This is why some residents grow concerned, and rightfully so, when they suddenly see a bike lane in their neighborhood, after years of intentionally being neglected by politicians. And the third and final subtle way gentrification takes place is marketing cities as livable and walkable. Until next time, think independently and strive for intelligence. Your future depends on it.